Hi, I'm Korey Hicks, professor of guitar and modern music, and I've been a professional guitarist and music educator for over 20 years. I've played over 4,000 live gigs, and I've been blessed to support my wife and 7 children with just my guitar. So you can imagine my frustration when I started getting extreme nerve pain and swelling on my right arm and my wrist. Most guitarists encounter pain or discomfort at some point in their lives, and this can be due to playing habits, learning wrong, environmental factors, misuse of the body, and in my case, I was born with an extra rib. So 2 things before we get started. Number 1, never play through pain. And number 2, go see a doctor. I want to preface this video by saying that I'm not a medical professional, and this is not medical advice. Rather, I'm going to be sharing with you my insights from over a decade of struggling with Thoracic Outlet Syndrome, which led me to experiment with nearly everything that has to do with reducing pain, reducing inflammation, focusing on economy of motion, reducing tension, learning proper technique and physiology of the guitar. So let's start with the right arm. This is your picking arm if you are a right-handed player, or your left arm if you are a left-handed player. The majority of students who come to me with some sort of pain, it's almost always in the picking arm, which you wouldn't think. You would think it would be in the fretting hand. And a lot of this has to do with tension and poor technique, or things learned incorrectly in the very beginning. So first of all, as guitar players, we deal with a lot of different types of instruments. Imagine working from a Stratocaster and then going and playing an acoustic. This is different than someone that plays piano, where as long as the bench is the same height, the ergonomics of the instrument are pretty much the same from instrument to instrument. So your hand, where it rests on a Stratocaster, is at a different angle than it would be on an acoustic or a 335 or a Les Paul. All these guitars sit differently when you sit down versus when you stand. They weigh different types, right? So it's going to be a huge difference depending on which guitar you use. And so this can cause problems. If you spend most of your time playing a Strat, for example, picking up an acoustic guitar and practicing that for hours a day for a gig, for example, might cause problems. So we have to know about that. All right, so let's get started with some of my hints for the right arm. Number 1, I like to roll up my sleeve so that I have flesh contact on the finish of the guitar. I noticed that when I had my sleeves rolled down, that my arm would keep sliding down the guitar, and I'd have to engage my pectoral muscles a lot more to be able to do the same amount of work. So you can imagine engaging your pecs for 4 hours during a gig could kind of cause some problems. And you'll also notice that a lot of professional guitar players play with their sleeves rolled up. So that's my first hint. Number 2, I noticed when I was practicing picking exercises, that type of thing, I would be looking at my pick as I played, and I notice a lot of students do this as well. This is called your brachial plexus up here. And so you can imagine if you're spending hours doing picking exercise and you're looking down at your hand to watch your technique, that you're going to cause some issues and nerve binding up there. So one of the things that I started doing is having a full-length body mirror here in my studio or my practice room, and I stand when I practice. In fact, I've been standing when I practice for, 25 years, I think, since the 1990s. So standing allows your whole body to be kind of in its best position. The weight of the guitar is distributed effectively, and you're going to be able to watch in that mirror all your different motions. And I find that helps really well. So 2 things to understand about the arm here. So if I look into the camera and I have my arm like this, turning into my body is pronation, and turning out is going to be called supination. And the picking motion that most players use is going to be pronation and supination. Okay, it's kind of like turning a key in a doorknob. So when we're practicing, the pick is going to be turned in that way. I see a lot of beginners, they rock the wrist back and forth like this, and that can cause some problems as well. And so what I do when I'm picking, I'll just play a standard B flat major scale here, is I keep that normal range of motion going with the arm, so I'm not, moving it down or up too much. I'm actually coming to meet each string, kind of like a clock face on the guitar. So it's kind of like you're strumming the guitar, but you're stopping at each place on the clock face to attach that new string. So when I'm at the low E, it might be here, and the high E might be down there because of where the arm comes down. And I find that reduces a lot of tension. So the range of motion is extremely important here. And when you don't do this correctly, like if you do it like this, right? So you see how that's like an L, that's called ulnar deviation, and that can cause all sorts of problems with your nerves. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is economy of motion with the picking hand. A lot of times when people see me play, they notice that it doesn't look like I'm moving very much. I try to keep a very small amount of motion, and that's one of the things that I practice when I'm doing my picking exercises or practicing scales or arpeggios or something like that. I'm trying to move as little as possible with the pick. Only do as much work as you need to with the pick, okay? No exaggerated motions, because a lot of these things can kind of have an impact on your overall tension level, okay? Also, watch your pick depth. I aim for the very top of the string. I notice a lot of players, they put the pick in between the strings, and now you're using extra effort to pull the pick out from the strings to go to the next string. So you should only be touching the top of the string, okay? Another way that you can reduce tension is by every once in a while putting the pick in between your first and middle fingers, okay? I see players do this a lot of times when people are doing like a technique like the harp harmonics or something, they'll kind of cup the pick like that, okay? So I put it in between those two fingers, and what this does is it reduces the amount of time that I'm pinching with the pick. Again, if you're playing a 4-hour gig or a long practice session, if you're pinching the pick the whole time, that's going to cause some issues. I also noticed, since I was a teenager, I would always cup the pick like this, especially if I was doing some sort of chicken picking or something like that, I might cup the pick. I noticed later on that actually tightens up this tendon. So if you're doing long solos or something with that cupped, that can cause more issues as well. So let's talk about planting fingers. A lot of people tell you not to plant your fingers, and you can touch the pick guard, and that's perfectly fine. You want your arm to kind of dangle. I mean, sit it down at your side. That's your natural position. Your natural position is not a fist. I see some people making a fist when they play. All you have to do is hold your arm and make a fist to feel everything tighten up in there. Imagine playing a gig for 4 hours or a long practice session while you do that. That's going to cause problems. But people are probably doing that because they don't want to plant their fingers. So as long as you're kind of moving on the pick guard, that's going to be fine. But don't plant a finger down, and also don't tighten up into a fist, okay? So other holding pick problems that I noticed, I have very dry hands. So like you probably have seen, of course you've all seen these. These are the Dunlop Tortex picks. And those are designed so that people will, kind of stick to their fingers so they won't drop the pick. That only works if you have sweaty hands. I can't hold on to those. So I started noticing that if you have dry hands, celluloid is the way to go. If you have sweaty hands, then the Tortex is the way to go to get it to stick to your hands. And if you're always kind of, readjusting your grip at the pick, of course that's going to cause more tension, okay? Different picks have different problems. So I'll start off with the pick that I used for about 15 years, the Dunlop Jazz 3. I found that, over time, this would cause a lot of tension because of how low to the strings it puts you. It puts you really close to the strings. And then I noticed with the bigger picks, so like a different type of Dunlop Tortex, it put me too far away from the strings. I felt like I wasn't accurate enough. I found a medium ground with my favorite pick, the Fender 354. This is the pick used by Lee Ritenour and David Gilmour, among others. Okay. There are other types of picks in that medium range, like the 347, which is a rounded one here. The Dunlop Flows are actually in that medium range. I also have a fancy blue chip here, the TP40, which is in that medium range. So those are all good things. It's not too small, it's not too big, not too sharp, not too round. That's kind of a medium ground for me. Okay, so let's talk about hybrid picking. So hybrid picking, a lot of the times, I'm going to be playing with all of my fingers. I'm holding the pick, and then I'm using the other 3 fingers to play, okay? When I first started doing that, I had a particular amount of pressure that I used with the pick, amount of force that I would use with the pick, and I brought my fingers up to that volume. and this can also cause tension. And so what I learned to do is play with your fingers with the normal tension that you would give them, but then soften your pick attack to match the fingers. So again, don't have your fingers match the strength of your pick attack. Have your pick attack soften to match the strength of your fingers. The idea, of course, is to make everything the same volume when you're playing. Okay? So now let's talk about things that are very specific to the instrument itself when it comes to the right hand. So obviously we have strings of different diameter. The low E string is going to be a greater mass and thickness than the high E string. It's going to require more effort to hit that string. All right, so if you're always doing your picking exercises on the low E string or something like that, that's going to require more effort. Okay. Also notice that these strings are not in a straight line. My fretboard is a 9.5-inch radius. Depending on the radius of your fretboard, your strings can be in a very wide curve, like a 7.25-inch radius, like a vintage Fender guitar, or it can be almost completely flat, like a classical guitar. That has an effect. If I'm used to playing on a 52 reissue telly and it has a 7.25-inch radius, and then I switch to a classical guitar that has a 20-inch radius, of course there's going to be issues because the muscle memory, my arm thinks the string's here, but it's really here. You see how that can cause tension? So a good rule of thumb is to kind of practice with all these different instruments slowly. Don't learn Cliffs of Dover on your 54 Strat and then go play it on a classical or something like that. So the larger diameter of the string is going to be more mass. So I also want to set up my guitar properly so that the strings and everything is exactly where I think it's going to be. I set up my string height at the 17th fret, 5/64 of an inch. I know that's medium high to some of you, but I do it so that every note on my guitar doesn't buzz. And I have a clean, clear action all throughout the range of the neck. I'll talk about setting up guitars at some other point. But the idea is from the top of the fret to the bottom of the string is the exact same height. Every string on my guitar feels exactly the same to play as every other string from down here to up here. Okay? That's super important to me so that I can have, a reliable instrument. Okay? And I do that for all of my guitars. Every guitar is set up almost exactly the same. If I'm playing a 4-hour gig and I'm switching between 4 or 5 different guitars, I need every guitar to play similarly so that I don't have issues later on. Okay? One other thing about guitar setups that I will mention is with the neck. You don't want a perfectly straight neck, obviously, because the string vibrates less here and here than in the middle, okay? I do use 10/1000ths of an inch at the 7th fret. That's my standard action setting. And I noticed if I went shallower than that I would start to get ulnar nerve problems on this hand. Now we're talking, playing 8, 10, 12 hours a day, but that's the thing. So the straighter the neck, the more tension is going to be on your left hand. Something to look out for, okay? All right, one last thing that I will talk about, I've talked about this in other videos, is ultimate technique settings. One way that I manage my technique, I use a small, like a Fender Champ or a Fender Frontman amplifier, a small solid-state amplifier. I turn the treble on 10, the mids and bass almost off, maybe on 2 or 3 or something, and I play only on the bridge pickup with no reverb, no delay, no modulation and no overdrive or distortion. Completely clean, clear, bright, piercing, like a microscope on your picking technique. And then I can relax. And then if I go and play a gig and plug in one of my nice tube amps, it's like jumping into a hot tub on a cold winter's day. It feels so relaxing. So that's something that I've done over the years. Develop your technique in a harsh environment and be able to be nice and calm and relaxed doing that. And then when you go to the gig with the natural tension that kind of shows up at a gig, you'll be nice and relaxed because it'll feel more spongy to you. All right, so we're going to talk about left hand here. So again, with the ulnar deviation thing, I try to keep the pinky in a straight line with the back of my arm. So a lot of things in modern life, like driving a car or typing on the keyboard, you'll notice people have this bent thing, kind of like an L. You want the L to be on the thumb side. This keeps everything straight. This is going to be your neutral position for the hand. And so when I play stuff, you'll notice that I keep this straight, right? So a lot of times when I'm showing students like that famous 1, 2, 3, 4 exercise you probably all know, what One of the things that they tell me is if they put their first finger here, they can't stretch to the 4th fret. So let me show you something. On your hand, there is so much more flexibility between the 1st and 2nd finger than between the pinky and the ring finger. So if I put my first finger here, yes, it's hard to stretch to the 4th fret, but check this out. If I put my first finger at the 4th fret, relax and act like that's home, I can touch the tuner. Okay? It's like a mind trick. And so a lot of times when I'm going to be playing something, I set myself up so that I'm pinky home, not first finger home. That's going to give you more reach. All right? Economy of motion on the left hand. Another thing, when you're playing things, I'll just use that 1, 2, 3, 4 exercise again. Keep your fingers as close to the frets as you possibly can, with minimal amount of tension. And you can watch this in that mirror that I've been talking about. And everything you play, don't go faster than you can do things with economy of motion. It's not worth it, okay? Another thing that I'm going to mention is going to be like the thumb over the neck thing, okay? This is super important, and a lot of people don't talk about this. A lot of people have like a classical guitar instructor, and they'll be like, why isn't your thumb on the back of the neck? People have even commented on my videos and been like, hey, why's your thumb over the neck? That's bad technique. It's not for a Telecaster, okay? So on a classical guitar, which has like a 20-inch radius, you have to play on the back of the neck because it's a really wide, flat fretboard. You can't do a thumb over the neck. And you can imagine a classical guitar instructor who's only played on a classical their whole life, they're going to see somebody, who's playing a Strat, and they're going to be like, hey, why's your thumb over the neck? Well, maybe they've never played a Strat. Maybe they don't know that a Strat has a very arched radius, 7¼ inch on a vintage. On those vintage instruments, you almost have to play with a thumb over the neck, but the classical instructor wouldn't know that. So your thumb on the back of the neck has to do with two things. Number one, what are you trying to accomplish? If I'm doing a minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio, of course I need my thumb on the back of the neck, right? But also, what kind of instrument are you playing? When I move to my Ibanez guitar, for example, that has I think it's a 12-inch radius or maybe a 16-inch radius, I play more with the thumb on the back of the neck because it's a flatter radius. When I play my Vintage 52 reissue, I need the thumb over the neck a lot because of how curved the radius is. So it depends on your instrument, and you have to adjust your technique. If you're so stuck in with this type of playing technique and you move to a flatter radius, it's going to hurt. If you're used to a flatter radius and you move to a more curved radius, it's going to hurt unless you adjust, okay? Another thing I'm going to talk about is bending technique. So when I'm bending here, I'm actually using the thumb over the neck, and I'm using this as a fulcrum motion, okay? So I'm bending the C note up to D, and what I'm doing is I'm using my ring finger on the C note, the middle finger on the B note, 1 fret behind it on the same string, and then my first finger is muting the adjacent strings. And that's how we bend, okay? And so when I'm bending like that, you're going to notice that bending is not pushing up a string. It's the whole arm in a fulcrum motion. Notice how my finger is not bending, or it's not pushing, sorry. It's not doing that, okay? That's proper bending technique. Sometimes I see students bending with one finger or bending with the pinky. That's going to mess up your wrist, okay? You have more than one finger helping. And if you look at every single guitar player, almost all guitar players, I guess Clapton's kind of an exception, but most famous guitar players bend with 2 fingers. This was an enormous thing for me when I was a teenager. I was really struggling with getting like a clean bend sound, and I was flipping through like a Guitar One magazine, and I'm like, wait a minute, he bends with 2 fingers, 2 fingers, 2 fingers, 2 fingers. I'm like, oh, that's it. And that really, really helped me, okay? A couple other things to pay attention to. Number one, this is called flexion, okay? So think of extension, flexion, okay? So when I'm doing anything with this hand, I'm trying to keep a neutral position of this arm, like this, okay? And so even when I'm playing this F major 7 chord, I'm trying to keep that straight. Here's a C major 7 with a 13 on top. I'm still keeping that straight and that straight the whole time, okay? Let's move on to sleeping positions. One of the problems I had with my thoracic outlet syndrome, having that for 9 years before I was able to have the surgery, I slept like this for probably at least 7 years. I couldn't sleep on my side. I couldn't sleep on my front. I had to sleep on my back because otherwise I'd wake up with numbness and I'd be in pain all day long and I'd be swollen up. So if you are having some nerve issues, I would recommend sleeping on your back. right? Try to keep your body at neutral positions. Let your hands dangle, right? Don't keep them up like this the whole time. Watch it when you're typing. Watch it when you're driving. Keep an idea. I had one student that he had all sorts of ulnar nerve issues. He would drive like this with his arm like on his car window. You got to watch what you're doing outside of the practice room. Maybe that's the reason you're hurting in the first place. So don't overuse your problem hand, but also don't not use it. When I was recovering from my surgery, one of the things I did incorrectly was I wanted to I just kept my arm like this unless I was going to use it for playing music. I would just like rest it. You can't do that. You got to exercise your hands. It's a variety of different types of exercises and motions that are going to make you heal up. Okay. Obviously, this goes without saying. Phones are awful. Doing this forever is really bad. One thing I noticed when you're in bed and you have the phone over you like that, don't do that. That's really bad for your nerves, ulnar nerves especially. So, couple last things. It's going to take a while to relearn new things. Stick with it. That's why the mirror is so important. It probably took me about 9 months to retrain my hand to be nice and loose. So keep at it. It's really worth it, okay? When you're practicing, mini breaks are more important than a straight through practice session. I found it would take me maybe 4 hours to get 2.5 hours of solid practice in. And what I do is I use a timer. So I'll practice scales for 15 minutes, take a 10-minute break. I'll practice arpeggios for 15 minutes, take a 10-minute break. So always be taking these breaks so that you don't have a whole lot of stress on your nerves, your tendons, and that type of thing. It doesn't matter how much you stretch if you have poor technique and if you have tension held in your body, okay? A couple other things too, I really advocate for standing when you practice. I've even heard famous guitar players, studio musicians say that they always have pains back here. Yeah, I would too if I sat in a chair for hours and hours and hours. I walk around my room while I'm practicing. It helps with blood flow and it does so many good things. So, all right, so a couple last things. If you do have inflammation, I took a whole bunch of supplements. Turmeric is one. It reduces inflammation. Okay, so this is turmeric supreme. I also have these omega-3 pills. Really help with inflammation. A big one for me is cayenne. Okay, cayenne reduces inflammation. This actually was my introduction to hot sauces. So we're talking habanero, we're talking ghost pepper, we're talking all those hot sauces. They reduce inflammation. So, maybe it's a good thing I got injured, got into hot sauce. Garlic and ginger are other ones that are natural inflammation reducers. And then lastly, magnesium. It's really good for relieving tension and it's really good for your nerves and your muscles, okay? So, a couple last thoughts. If you're suffering with pain while playing, I really hope that you learned something today that could improve your comfort level when you're playing. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. It was probably the worst part of my life. I got very, very depressed, and it was just really bad. So if you're a player that's struggling with pain, what has worked for you? Post in the comments below. Let us know what's worked. Let us know if you have recovered from it. And those of you who might be having pains, post below. We can help each other out. So if you enjoyed this content or found it useful, please consider subscribing and liking this video so that it can go out and help more people. I also have tons of lesson content on this channel as well, gear and all sorts of stuff. I also now have a Patreon account, so members get member-only videos, guitar and theory instructional content. That includes tabs and charts and tutorials, theory and ear training drills, and a lot more. So click the description below for more info on that. And thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. Heal up, and I wish you all the best. Peace.